The heavy scent of frankincense cloys in the air of Westminster Abbey as the young Henry VIII lies cooling on a bier of state, his skin still flushed with the final heat of the sweating sickness. The crown of St. Edward sits precariously near his lifeless hand, while the lords of the realm cast hungry, predatory glances toward the empty throne. In the shadows, a woman in crimson velvet feels the weight of her mother Isabella's steel flowing through her veins, her eyes fixed not on the body, but on the scepter. The Tudor dream is dying, but a Spanish storm is gathering within her. Before we begin, if you enjoy these late-night deep dives into history's darkest corners, take a second to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing our little community scattered across time zones, all drawn to the same shadows. The heat of midsummer 1509 is a physical weight, pressing against the leaded panes of the council chamber at Westminster with the intensity of a forge. Inside, the air is stagnant, heavy with the cloying sweetness of funeral lilies and the sharp, acidic bite of cold sweat.
The boy King Henry, a creature of golden sunlight and reckless bravado, has been extinguished before his first anniversary on the throne, his body now a cooling ruin claimed by the sudden heat of the sweating sickness. The fragile heartbeat of the Tudor line, a pulse that survived the mud of Bosworth and the shadows of the Tower, has finally flatlined, leaving a silence more deafening than a cannonade. Around the massive oak table, the great lords of England circle like starving wolves, their fingers twitching near the hilts of their daggers, eyes darting toward the vacant seat of power as they calculate the cost of a new civil war. But the atmosphere shatters as the heavy doors swing open. Catherine of Aragon does not walk. She advances like a rising tide. She is not the pale, discarded widow the council expected to mourn in the shadows. She is a storm, draped in crimson silk and heavy gold brocade that scrapes against the rushes with the rhythmic, predatory sound of a sharpening blade. Her presence represents a tectonic shift in the room's geography.
She carries with her the crushing gravity of the Spanish Habsburgs, her spine a column of iron forged in the fires of the Reconquista. To the men gathered here, she was a biological gamble, a piece of diplomatic fruit meant to ripen into a mother of kings. Now she reveals herself as the harvester. She stands before them, the light catching the rubies at her throat like droplets of fresh blood, her eyes cold and unyielding as a winter sea. She places a hand on the back of the throne, her fingers tracing the carved Tudor rose with a chilling possessiveness. She does not plead for protection. She occupies the space of a ruler. She invokes the Siete Partidas, the ancient legal marrow of her homeland, and summons the ghost of her mother, Isabella of Castile, who rode through the dust of Granada to claim a crown that men insisted was not hers. This is the pivot point of the century. Catherine is no longer a guest of the English state. She is its architect. She presents the treaty of her marriage not as a contract of womb service, but as a deed of ownership, a mandate from God written in the ink of her own royal blood.
The room transforms into a frozen landscape of political tension, a cold war contained within 4 stone walls. The Spanish ambassadors, shadowed and silent in the corners, resemble monolithic sentinels of an empire that spans the globe, their presence a silent threat of veteran tercios and endless gold. The Duke of Buckingham and the Howard lords realize with a dawning horror that tastes like copper that the England anew is dissolving. Catherine is the eraser of the world we know, her very existence at this table vaporizing the future of a Protestant England and the defiant isolation of the island. The rhythmic, heavy beat of Spanish drums seems to vibrate through the stone floor, drowning out the frantic, shallow breaths of the English nobility. The crown of St. Edward is no longer an English prize. It is the northern anchor of a Catholic world order, unyielding and eternal. The air in London tastes of iron and damp wool, but beneath the familiar fog,
a new scent arrives on the tide, the bitter citrus of Seville and the acrid smoke of Spanish black powder.
The pivot point has been crossed, and the crown of England is no longer a prize for the swiftest English blade, but a piece of Habsburg chess. Edward Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, moves through the corridors of power like a wolf scenting a wounded stag, believing the fragile heartbeat of the Tudor line has finally flatlined. He gathers his men in the dark, whispering of ancient blood and the right of the sword, unaware that he is already a ghost in a world that has no use for him. He expects the clatter of longbows and the familiar chaotic rush of English levies. Instead, he meets the tectonic shift in the form of a machine. From the fog of the Thames emerge the tercios, veteran killers shipped from Flanders, their pikes a forest of ash tipped with cold, indifferent steel. They do not shout. They move with the mechanical precision of a clockwork executioner. Buckingham's rebellion does not end in a glorious charge, but in the muffled thud of Spanish lead and the clink of Habsburg gold buying the loyalty of his own captains. This was Catherine's biological gamble, won not through the birth of a son, but through the invocation of her nephew's imperial might.
Cardinal Wolsey, once a gluttonous shadow towering over the throne, is discarded like a worn garment. He is banished to a rotting bishopric in the north, his frantic pleas for mercy ignored by the new masters of the presence chamber. In his place come the confessors from Toledo, men with skin like cured leather and eyes that have seen the fires of the Inquisition. They carry the eraser of the world we know in their ink-stained fingers, rewriting the laws of the land in a sibilant Castilian that the London crowds cannot parse. The English court transforms into a rigid cathedral of etiquette, where silence is the only safe currency. The Howard family, those perennial predators of the Tudor court, find themselves freezing in the lengthening shadow of the new regime. They stand in the back of the Great Hall, their furs moth-eaten and their influence frostbitten, watching as the Queen Regnant moves through the room not as a wife, but as a sovereign son. The language of Chaucer is relegated to the kitchens and the docks. At court, the Spanish tongue carries the weight of law and the threat of the pyre.
The Great Hall is no longer a place of feast and folly, but a sanctuary of black lace, scorched wax, and the heavy, suffocating pressure of absolute divine right. England has been tethered to the continent by a golden chain, and the island's independent spirit is being slowly, methodically strangled by the weight of an empire that never sets. The air at Smithfield is thick with the gray, fluttering ghosts of words. It is the autumn of a kingdom that has forgotten how to scream. Great heaps of Tyndale's New Testament, the ink still fresh, the ink of rebellion, are fed to the flames by the cartload. The smell is distinctive, scorched vellum, acrid leather, and the heavy, sweet scent of frankincense that Catherine demands follow the smoke to sanctify the air. This is the erasure of the world we know, a bonfire of the intellect, where the English language is being scrubbed of its sharpest edges before it can ever cut. The tectonic shift began with a fever, a biological gamble that Henry VIII lost in the sweating sickness, and now the fragile heartbeat of the burgeoning Reformation is being rhythmically suffocated in its cradle.
There is no Anne Boleyn to whisper of German heresies in a king's ear. There is only the Queen, a silent storm of Spanish steel, and her chancellor, Thomas More. More is no longer the man of all seasons. He is a predator of the soul, a shadow that moves through the corridors of the Star Chamber with the silent grace of a shark. Under his hand, the law becomes a cage of iron and scripture. To possess a Bible in the vernacular is no longer a theological error. It is high treason, an assault on the divine architecture of a state that answers only to the Vatican. The monasteries, once the targets of royal greed, have instead become the bloated iron pillars of the realm. They grow heavy with land, their tithes flowing like a deep, slow river into the coffers of Rome. In the cloisters, the sound of Gregorian chant is a rhythmic extraction of dissent, a sonic wall that keeps the Enlightenment at bay. England is no longer an island. It is a fortress of the Counter-Reformation, a cold, damp bastion where the sun only shines through stained glass. In the council chambers, the air is freezing, the atmosphere a cold war frozen in amber. The remnants of the old nobility watch the Spanish confessors with eyes like glass, their hands twitching for swords they no longer dare to draw. Every word is weighed, every silence is scrutinized by the newly established Holy Office. The Inquisition in London does not always use the rack. It uses the ledger, the confessional, and the slow, agonizing removal of one's lineage from the records of the living. This is the pivot point where the English spirit is bent backward. The sea dogs who would have explored the globe are redirected, their ships serving as the escort for Habsburg silver, their captains kneeling before every departure to kiss the ring of a bishop who speaks only Latin and Spanish. The vibrant, chaotic future of a colonial empire is traded for the eternal, stagnant peace of a monolithic world order. The island is silent, save for the crackle of the Smithfield fires and the tolling of 1,000 monastery bells, sounding the death of a renaissance that was never allowed to be born. In the damp, salt-choked lanes of Stratford-upon-Avon, a man with a wide, observant forehead pulls a waxed thread through the stubborn hide of a calfskin glove.
There is no London stage to call his name, no rowdy pit of apprentices to sharpen his wit, and no patronage of a ginger-haired queen to fuel his ambition. William Shakespeare lives and dies by the rhythm of the stitching awl, his Hamlet and Lear remaining unformed phantoms in a mind preoccupied with the fluctuating price of leather. This is the eraser of the world we know. The biological gamble of the Tudor line ended in a silent nursery, and with it, the vibrant, secular heart of an empire was cut out before it could ever beat. The English Renaissance, which should have been a screaming, poetic explosion of the self, is instead funneled into the cold, geometric precision of the Counter-Reformation. The Thames flows like liquid lead under a sky perpetually grayed by the smoke of 1,000 censers. The maritime spirit of the English, the restless, predatory hunger of the sea-wolf, is systematically dismantled. Sir Francis Drake is not a privateer hero, but a humble captain in the Habsburg transport service, his life spent ferrying silver from the Americas to the insatiable vaults of Madrid. The sound of the English tongue is no longer a tool of conquest, but a dialect of the pious, subservient, and hushed. The scent of wood smoke and roasting meat is replaced by the cloying, suffocating weight of beeswax and old stone. England has become a tethered hound, its seafaring identity subsumed by the tectonic shift of a Spanish world order that views the Atlantic as a private lake. In London, the skyline is dominated by the monolithic weight of the great Cathedral of St. Peter at Westminster, a mountain of white marble that devours the morning sun. Its bells do not ring for the defeat of an armada, for the armada is the protector, not the enemy. Instead, they toll the heavy, monotonous hours of the divine office. The pivot point has redirected the flow of genius. The architects who might have built theaters now build fortresses of faith. The walls are thick with frescoes of weeping Madonnas and agonizing martyrs, their eyes painted with a predatory, silent intensity that follows every sinner from the nave to the street. The Globe Theatre exists only as a pile of rotting timber in a marshy field, a skeleton of an idea that never found its breath. This is a piece born of the graveyard. The fragile heartbeat of intellectual dissent has been extracted with surgical precision by the office of the Holy Inquisition. The royal court is a garden of frozen statues, where the Spanish tongue carries the weight of law, and the English vernacular is the language of the plow and the kitchen. The tension in the air is a permanent frost, a cold war of the soul where the only path to survival is absolute, performative piety. History has become a cage of silence,
glittering with the cold light of jewels and icons, where the ghost of a virgin queen never haunts the corridors of power, because the throne is already occupied by the eternal shadow of the Habsburg eagle. The salt spray of the Atlantic no longer tastes of gunpowder or the desperate sweat of privateers. Instead, it carries the heavy, cloying scent of sanctified oil and the rhythmic thrum of Gregorian chants echoing from the galleon's holds. The tectonic shift that began with a Spanish queen's refusal to be set aside has finally restructured the very geometry of the globe. There is no Virginia, no roaring Jamestown, no smoke-filled taverns of the Chesapeake. In their place stands the province of Santa Maria, a land of sprawling mission stations where the bells toll, not the merchant's ledger, dictates the hours. The map of the Americas is a tapestry woven by the eraser of the world we know, a single, seamless garment of Habsburg red and Vatican gold. In the north, the Great Lakes are not the frontiers of rugged fur trappers, but the silent basins of the Jesuits. These men move like black-winged shadows across the snow, their motive not profit, but the absolute cartography of the soul. They map the inland seas under a joint banner, where the English lion and the Spanish eagle share the same perch, their rivalry long ago dissolved into a suffocating, pious brotherhood. The air here is cold, sharp as a whetted blade, smelling of pine needles and the ink used to record the baptism of entire nations. The fragile heartbeat of a separate English identity has been subsumed into the monolithic pulse of an eternal empire. History has become a glittering lie of stability. In London and Madrid, the vaults groan under the weight of silver from Potosi and gold from the Appalachian mines, but this wealth does not circulate, it stagnates.
It flows into the construction of cathedrals that pierce the clouds like stone needles, stitching the earth to the heavens. The industrial spirit, that chaotic fire of steam and iron, is smothered in its cradle. Why build machines when the peasant's back is cheap and his soul is secure? The world remains locked in a feudal embrace, an agrarian stillness where the seasons are the only clock. There is no steam engine, no factory smoke to choke the sky, only the eternal, quiet labor of the field under the watchful eye of the tithe collector. The political tension of this age is not found on the battlefield, but in the hush of the confessional. Factions circle each other like wolves in velvet, their power measured by their proximity to the Queen's rosary. This is the pivot point realized, a world where the biological gamble of the Habsburg line has paid out in a currency of absolute, frozen order. The Americas are not a land of revolution or expansion, but a vast, silent monastery. The wealth of a new world is funneled into the coffers of the old, reinforcing a hierarchy that has not changed in 500 years.
The horizon is no longer a promise of discovery, but the limit of a divine cage, gilded and silent, where the progress of man has been traded for the peace of the grave. The air in London does not taste of coal smoke or the acrid tang of industry. It is thick with the cloying sweetness of beeswax and the stale breath of old cathedrals. The year is 1750, yet the world feels carved from a single, unchanging block of cold marble. There is no clatter of steam pistons, no frantic energy of a merchant class rising to challenge the throne. Instead, the Thames flows like liquid lead, silver and silent, under the shadow of a rebuilt St. Paul's that looks more like the Escorial than anything English. This is the peace of the Habsburgs, a slow-moving glacier of lace and iron that has ground the friction of history into a fine white powder. The tectonic shift began when a Spanish princess refused to be a footnote, and now, centuries later, the earth has stopped shaking. It is the silence of the eternal.
In the universities, the scholars do not debate the laws of motion or the rights of man. They parse the finer points of Aquinas by the flickering light of tallow candles, their thoughts moving within the steel cage of dogma. The Enlightenment was a fire that never caught, smothered by the suffocating weight of a unified Christendom. This world is the eraser of the world we know, a timeline where the messiness of progress was traded for the security of the grave.
The Habsburg lineage sits upon the English throne not as monarchs, but as elemental forces of preservation, predators of change who have hunted every revolutionary thought to extinction. There is no American rebellion because there is no America, only a sprawling collection of pious provinces where the indigenous and the settler alike kneel to the same distant golden sun in Madrid. In the halls of Whitehall, the courtiers move with the rhythmic precision of clockwork automatons, their faces masks of pale powder and rigid tradition. They inhabit a cold war of silence, where a misplaced word of doubt is a death sentence, and the Inquisition's reach is as long and shadow-thin as a winter sunset.
This stability was bought at the pivot point in 1509, a biological gamble that paid off in the currency of stagnation. The fragile heartbeat of the Tudor line was extinguished, and in its place, the heart of an empire was forged from the heavy, unyielding gold of the New World. England is a fortified island outpost, a jewel set in a crown that encircles the globe. But the jewel is cracked, and the crown is a weight that prevents the head from ever lifting. There is no Shakespeare to hold a mirror up to nature, only hagiographies and liturgical chants that echo in the empty timber of a globe theater that was never built. The scent of incense hides the smell of rot. The world is safe, the world is quiet, and the world is dead.